Have you ever felt completely alone, even when surrounded by people, as if something inside you was awakening, but no one around you seemed to understand? Perhaps without realizing it, you're on the path to spiritual awakening, and it almost always begins with solitude. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. We live in a society that teaches us from an early age to fear loneliness. We're bombarded with messages that associate being alone with failure, rejection, or weakness. But what if I told you that in fact loneliness can be the greatest sign that you're finally finding yourself? That something inside you, something essential, deep, and true, has begun to awaken. Alan Watts, a philosopher and thinker who delved deeply into Eastern spiritual traditions, spoke clearly about this. True self-knowledge requires courage, and this courage often separates us from the crowd. Because when you begin to see beyond appearances, to hear the silence that exists behind the constant noise of the world, you naturally disconnect from what is superficial. It is at this moment that loneliness arises, not as a punishment, but as an inevitable consequence of the expansion of consciousness. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that your old habits, conversations, and relationships no longer make sense? That the world around you keeps spinning, but you no longer spin with it in the same way? This is the silent crisis of awakening, and while it may seem painful at first, it's the gateway to a freedom most people never even imagine exists. Spiritual solitude is not the absence of companionship, but the intense presence of oneself. It's when you begin to face yourself without masks, without distractions, without intermediaries. And in this intimate encounter with your own essence, everything changes. Your priorities shift, your pain takes on new meaning, and what once moved you, recognition, acceptance, belonging, no longer carries the same weight. Of course, this is scary. Breaking with the old internal and external world isn't simple. After all, we've been trained to seek security, not authenticity. But the truth is that no one awakens to their true nature by remaining in the comfort of the familiar. The spiritual journey requires surrender, and solitude is the first step. Maybe you're experiencing exactly this right now, feeling out of place, misunderstood, questioning everything that once felt right. If so, take a deep breath. You're not lost. You're waking up. And that's what we're going to talk about now, about how this apparent absence of everything can actually be the beginning of everything. You begin to realize that the more you connect with yourself, the less you fit in where you used to belong. The conversations that once excited you now feel empty. The people you used to spend time with no longer speak the same language. And as much as this may feel strange, that's precisely the beauty of this process. The solitude that accompanies awakening is not absence, it is transition. It is the sacred interval between who you were and who you are becoming. It is like crossing an invisible bridge, where the old no longer serves, and the new has not yet fully revealed itself. And in this creative void, where almost nothing seems to make sense, is where everything truly begins to take shape. In this profound silence, you find yourself facing what you've always avoided, your shadows, your fears, your forgotten truths. But instead of running away, you begin to face them, not because you've suddenly become stronger, but because you've finally understood that there's no other way, but through yourself. This is where true power is born, not the kind that shouts, imposes, or needs to prove something, but the serene power of those who know themselves, of those who no longer allow themselves to be shaped by external expectations, the power of those who have learned to be alone without feeling empty, of those who have found in silence a new way of listening, not to the world but to their own soul. And if all this resonates with you, if this content has touched you in some way, it's because you're also on this path, perhaps without all the answers, perhaps with more questions than certainties, but already on the right track. And that's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel, not only to avoid missing future content, but also because this journey is easier when we have someone to share genuine reflections with. Here you'll find more videos like this, profound, provocative, and, above all, human. We're just getting started. And in the next part of this journey, we'll delve even deeper into the connection between inner silence and spiritual freedom. Because understanding solitude is just the first step. Learning to flourish within it is what transforms everything. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because awakening, contrary to what many people imagine, is not a mystical experience filled with light and peace from the outset. It hurts. And it hurts because as you begin to see the truth, the real, raw truth, unfiltered by culture, religion, or other people's expectations, you move away from what once seemed familiar. There is a silent price to seeing the world clearly, and that price is often paid in loneliness, misunderstanding, and displacement. No one talks about this in self-help books. No one prepares you for the discomfort of no longer fitting into conversations that once seemed normal, for the discomfort of being among friends and feeling like you're on another planet, for the sensation of seeing behind the scenes of a theater that most people still think is real. It's like waking up in the middle of a collective dream and realizing you can no longer pretend to be asleep. And this is where true transformation begins, the moment you understand that belonging to yourself is worth more than belonging to any group, that following your own truth, however lonely that journey may seem, is infinitely more valuable than walking with the crowd toward a destination that was never yours. Because following the crowd is comfortable, but it almost always costs you your authenticity. The hidden truth behind this dynamic is simple and brutal. Most people aren't seeking truth. They're seeking security, approval, validation. That's why so many continue to live with masks, smiling on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. And when you decide to take yours off, even if it's in silence, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because your freedom exposes the invisible prison of others. Your courage challenges others' conformity. Your presence becomes a mirror, and not everyone is ready to truly look at themselves. But it's at this point that silence becomes a sanctuary, not the kind of silence that hurts, that comes from abandonment or exclusion, but a chosen, mature silence, where you can finally listen to what truly matters, your intuition, your soul, your essence. Alan Watts said that the ego is just an idea, a mental construct we create to feel safe in an unpredictable world. And when you begin to dissolve that ego, to let go of the need for approval, you also begin to free yourself. Little by little, you realize you no longer need to explain who you are. You no longer need to justify yourself, nor diminish yourself to fit into spaces too tight for your truth. The freedom of being alone then reveals itself as a strength, not a weakness. Because in this solitary space, you reconnect with what is real. You stop distracting yourself and start creating. You stop repeating and start feeling. You stop running and finally start walking. This journey isn't easy. At times, it will feel overwhelming. There will be days when everything inside you will want to go back, to hide back in your old comfort zone. But transformation requires moving forward. It requires decision, presence, resilience, and above all, it requires that you take responsibility for your own consciousness. Because being chosen, in the deep spiritual sense of the word, is not a romantic blessing. It's a radical responsibility. It means letting go of the script you were given and writing your own, with truth and purpose. That's why the most conscious are often the loneliest, because it's not about spiritual elitism, nor existential arrogance. It's about depth, about no longer being able to live on the surface, about looking at the world and seeing its contradictions with a calm but attentive gaze. It's like having access to a code that few have deciphered, and this inevitably creates distance. Not because you think you're better, but because you're simply on a different wavelength. And the more you align with this new frequency, the further you move away from the crowd's illusion, that sense of false belonging, of artificial connection, based on social roles and unspoken expectations. Suddenly, being alone becomes preferable to being in bad company, even if that bad company is old memories, repetitive patterns, or even parts of yourself that need to be left behind. If this resonates within you, it's because this journey is yours too. And maybe, just maybe, you're closer than you think to breaking free from the invisible chains that have held you back for so long. Chains that use the name of security, but in reality, hindered your expansion. I want to take you even deeper, where the truth doesn't just bother you, it transforms you. Because when the veil begins to tear, there's no turning back. You can no longer fool yourself. The inner voice that once whispered becomes ever clearer, more demanding, almost impossible to ignore, and that changes everything. The perception that was once just an intuition begins to expand. You realize that most of the pain you've carried for so long didn't come from the world, but from the constant attempt to fit into a place that was never yours, from the exhausting effort of maintaining a character to be accepted, loved, respected. But characters tire, and there comes a time when the soul demands it. Either you break yourself to continue pleasing others, or you break yourself once and for all and rebuild yourself whole. This is the turning point. what many call the dark night of the soul. It's not a moment of random despair, but a necessary collapse, a disorganization of the old identity that no longer supports the new consciousness that is emerging. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also sacred, because in this chaos there is birth, there is revelation. It's as if everything is crumbling on the outside, so that finally something true can rise on the inside. And at this stage, what was previously interpreted as weakness begins to take on new meaning. Sensitivity, for example, ceases to be seen as vulnerability and becomes understood as a refined antenna, a tool for deep connection with reality. You don't feel too much. You just feel what others still avoid feeling. The pain of others, the incoherence of words, the energy behind the environment. All of this begins to resonate more strongly because now you are clearer, more present, more real. It's natural for this new state of presence to distance you from old spaces. Some friendships begin to fade without a fight. Some places no longer make sense. Even your goals shift. What was once driven by status, validation, or fear of being left behind no longer moves you. You begin to choose what nourishes your soul, not your ego. And this is a powerful filter, because much that seemed essential simply loses its value when you align with your essence. This new perspective also reveals something uncomfortable: how much we've been conditioned to live for others, to seek recognition, to avoid rejection, to measure our worth based on applause that often didn't even speak to our truth. And the silence that follows this realization is profound, because there you understand that you no longer need to prove anything, that you can exist without explaining yourself, that you can walk without an audience. Alan Watts said that the ego is the illusion of separation, a useful illusion, but an illusory one nonetheless. And when you begin to let go of this need to be someone to the world, a new inner reality reveals itself. You no longer seek to be special, just to be whole. And being whole, ironically, makes you unique, not because you stand out, but because you align. And this silent integrity is more powerful than 1,000 words. It's at this point that solitude becomes freedom, because it's no longer absence, it's space. Space to breathe, create, feel, perceive. Space to build a life with real purpose, with conscious decisions with true impact, not to impress, but to serve. Serving what is most authentic within you, serving the flow of life, your truth, your mission. Yes, a mission, because those who awaken inevitably face it, not as a heroic task in the external sense, but as an internal responsibility to live coherently. Being chosen isn't about glory, it's about clarity, and clarity requires presence. It requires being awake enough to avoid falling back into the traps of ego, haste, and self-abandonment. Every step you take away from the crowd is a step toward yourself, and every time you choose to listen to the silence instead of the external noise, you strengthen this new version, more conscious, freer, more alive. And that's what truly scares the system, a person who doesn't need convincing because they've already found within themselves what they were looking for outside. And when you find this, everything changes. The way you relate, what you consume, what you tolerate, what you build. Because when the truth sets in, you can no longer live with less. It's like discovering you were only breathing half a breath, and suddenly your lungs open, as if time slows down, and you begin to see life as it is, and not as you were taught to see it. But this new perspective, this new listening, this new presence is still maturing, because even after awakening, there are still layers to be broken through. And it's about awakening because awakening is just the first step on a journey that has no map, no guarantees. And this can be frightening, but also liberating. When you finally realize there's no final destination, that there's no finish line defined by society, you begin to live each moment more mindfully. Your mind stops chasing empty goals and begins to dive into the present. And the present, when looked at deeply, reveals layers no one taught you to see. You begin to realize how the world around you is built on unconscious agreements. People tell you what's normal, what's right, what's acceptable, but all of this is made up. These are structures created by dormant minds, repeated for generations. And when you question these structures, it's natural for others to try to silence you, because by shattering the illusion, you threaten everything that was considered real by those still asleep. And that's why being authentic, in this world of appearances, is an almost revolutionary act of courage. It's not easy to go against the grain, when everything pushes you to conform. It's not easy to uphold your own truth when the silence within shouts louder than external approval. But that's precisely where a new strength is born. A strength that doesn't need to be noisy to be firm. A strength born of integrity, of the conscious choice to no longer betray yourself. You'll feel the temptation to return to your old comfort zone. There will be days when the weight of loneliness seems too great, when certainties vanish, and all that's left is empty space. But this emptiness isn't there to punish you. It's there to cleanse you, to remove the excess, to tear out what no longer serves you, because only in emptiness can something new blossom. It is in this fertile silence that the chosen man, as Alan Watts said, begins to hear his own voice. Not the voice trained to please, but the essential voice, the one that comes from the soul, from the center, from what is eternal. This voice is not shaped by likes, or numbers. It is shaped by truth, and truth doesn't shout. It simply is. The process of letting go of your ego is like walking through a maze of mirrors. At every turn, you see a distorted image of yourself, a version shaped by trauma, expectations, and memories. And little by little, with honesty and presence, you begin to shatter these mirrors. You begin to see beyond the image, and by seeing, you heal, not magically or immediately, but truly, 1 inch at a time. And when you stop caring about the approval of others, when you understand that no external validation can fill the inner void that only connecting with yourself can heal, then you become free. Free to create, to express yourself, to love, to be. Free to say no, without guilt, and yes, without fear. Free to exist, outside of labels and molds. But this freedom, like everything valuable, demands responsibility. Conscience demands action. Because the more you see, the less room you have to pretend you don't see. And this changes the way you live, how you eat, how you work, who you hang out with. Because each choice carries a weight, the weight of truth, and at the same time, an immense lightness, that of no longer needing to lie to yourself. This path is lonely, yes, but it's not empty. It's fertile ground for deep growth. It's where you find clarity amidst the confusion, purpose amidst the chaos, peace amidst the noise. And over time, you stop looking for ready-made answers and begin to find wisdom in the questions. You begin to realize there's no end to this process. There's only the next step, and the next, and the next, always guided by your inner listening. And the further you walk, the more sensitive you become to subtle truths, to the invisible connections that unite everything, to the silent intelligence behind existence. You begin to realize that you are being guided, not by external forces, but by your own essence. And this guidance needs no proof or explanation. It simply happens when you stop resisting. Ultimately, the journey of the conscious person, of the awakening being, is not about finding something out there. It's about remembering who they are before the world dictates who they should be. And each layer that dissolves, each attachment that fades, each illusion that falls, all of this leaves you more naked, more true, more whole. And it's in this state of wholeness that true connection happens, not with everyone, but with the right ones, with those who have also left fear behind, who have also torn off their masks, who are also dancing on the fine line between pain and freedom.